Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. Hello, welcome again to Harvesting Wisdom. I'm your host, Mike McMahon. Today I have two people I'm very familiar with and are friends, Hasiel Baez, which I probably never pronounced correctly, but it doesn't matter. Sherry McLean with IAS Labs. Again, we're talking about agriculture, sustainable practices. Today's podcast is a little different because you guys are kind of the technicians. So, Hasiel, you're responsible for, first of all, you're helping with the books I'm doing, some of the technical stuff, but because and part of that is that it's a learning curve for you. But you're also responsible for us to get our U.S. compost certifications and our OMRI and NOP and all the other certifications we need. And it's quite a process, so I'll go into that. Sherry, you have the lab. And there's only, I think, 2 big labs in town, and you're one of them. But you're the only U.S. compost certified lab. And so we work with you. Plus, you take my calls at weird hours and answer questions that I probably should already know answers to. But we'll get into that a little bit. I'll read a little about your bios. Hasiel, you are an aerospace engineer graduate, and you're working on your master's.
Yes.
Again, an aerospace engineer. You're using a lot of those engineering principles with both our nonprofit urban farming and with Soil, Seed, and Water to do the variety of different things we're doing. So you're kind of the research and development guy and the certification guy. You're the guy who does what nobody else really wants to do. And then Sherry, your background is a couple decades doing agronomy and chemistry and biology at your lab. Both of you have pretty extensive education backgrounds. You're a teacher over at Mesa Community, kind of an adjunct professor working on soil science. So let me turn it over to you first, since you're the closest to me, and tell me about your experience since this whole thing has started and how you apply some of your basic education to this, because it's, in a way, it seems like a big departure, but I think you've learned to kind of merge concepts.
Yeah. So it is a huge, it's a huge deviation from agriculture and aerospace engineering. But the cool thing is that I've been able to apply concepts of fluid mechanics, heat transfer. When we did the worm population studies, I used concepts of applied experimental statistics. So I've had the opportunity to apply a lot of my engineering concepts with you. And I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, the certification things with U.S. Compost Council and OMRI, it's been a huge hassle. But yeah, working with Sherry, it has been a good experience. But yeah, that's basically what I do.
Right. So when you're getting certified, it's a bit of a hassle, but the certifying bodies, which for OMRI and NOP, they're really kind of ancillary entities for the USDA, right? They're the surrogate that actually does the certification process, but they have a pretty rigid program that you got to follow, and they're busy, right?
Yeah.
They have a lot of people knocking on their doors. So walk me through, how long does it take? What exactly do you do to get a certification? Because we have 27 different blends. So how do you go through certification for U.S. Compost? Because they have several certifications just within U.S. Compost, but then also with some of the other products, but all of them trying to get OMRI or NOP. And why is it even important for us to get those certifications?
I think the reason why certifications are important is because consumers go, especially I think me, the younger population, or just anybody in general, anyone who cares about global warming and stuff like that. When you go and buy stuff, you look and see if it's organic. You see the ingredients that are in it. So I think it's really important that we have that sense of credibility when you buy something that's organic, that's sustainable. But yeah, U.S. Compost Council, in order to apply for them, we had to get a permit through the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. And through them, we had to get a fire control permit. It probably took me like 6 months to get the permit through ADEQ. And then once I got that permit, I was able to start the application process with U.S. Compost Council. So I couldn't even start the application process with U.S. Compost Council until I got that permit from ADEQ. And then OMRI, on the other hand, which stands for the Organic Materials Review Institute, their process is a lot harder. They require like compost logs. They require for us to like show like proof of invoices. It's just a really long process, really. But in the end, I think it's important for us to have those certifications because it gives you the credibility to know that everything that you're doing is organic and sustainable. Because really, that's what our goal is here.
Right. Now, part of that process is we have to show lab tests.
Right. Yeah.
Over and over and over and over and over again, which is great for Sherry because it's a lot of business, right? But we have tested the soil on our property before we started. We've tested the raw materials, whether it's raw manure or wood chips that we bring in. We've tested even the other components that we blend, whether it's chicken or any of the other ones. That we've brought in that we'll test. We test the water, then we test sometimes during blending, but certainly after we've blended and after it's gone through thermophilic and after it's gone through that whole process of rest, which is another 60 days, and we bring it in and then we give it to you, and then you give me back a report. And I ask you the same questions on every single report, but walk through one of those reports for me because you see them in your sleep, right? That's the same report. And there's different tests that we do, right?
Right. There's many different tests. Most of the analyses, we're looking at different nutrients, right? We need to know what we have when we're starting, during the process, towards the end, because you want to know your product. You can't make an end product if you don't know what you're putting into it. So it's important to know the whole operation from start to finish so you can get yourself dialed in. So on the final report, you're going to get what's important for the consumer as well as you need to know. You need to know what your pH of the material is, how the salinity is, right? How salty is it? Salts can be good. It can be a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's sodium. It could be a good salt, like potassium and nitrogen
Right.
and
You
things
always
like
tell me
that.
that. That's generally what we have is the good salts.
Exactly. You need to
It
get your
still
good
looks
salts.
like salt.
And you have to have your secondary nutrients, right? Your your calcium, your magnesium, and your sulfur. Your major nutrients, which is your potassium, your nitrogen, your phosphorus. Those three biggies everyone wants to know.
Right.
But we also need those micronutrients, the iron, the manganese, the zinc, the copper, the boron, the molybdenum. They're all very important. And so we need to know what's in it so that we don't put too much down and toxify our fields.
Right.
You need to know what's in it so you know what your product is worth, so you know how to price it, how to bag it, and take care of it. And so on your reports, as you'll see, you see everything in the concentrations we get, the parts per million, the percent. But in your compost, we also let you know how many pounds per ton. Because if you are a grower or a home producer and you want to add, say, 5 tons per acre or a pound per 1,000 square feet, we let you know how many pounds per ton. So then you know how much of your product to put down per acre, per 1,000 square feet, how big your garden is. So you don't over-apply, you don't under-apply. And then we take it one step farther with the proficiencies, right? We look for heavy metals because what people don't realize, and you know from your processes, that all organic materials, regardless where it comes from this planet, has everything in it. But it's how much you want to disclose. So we have to check for those critters. Right. We have to look for heavy metals, arsenic,
and there's
lead.
a threshold,
Exactly.
right?
We make sure there's no heavy metals, and they're below our EPA limits, below safety for people. Because they're going to be there, but we just make sure they're safe.
Sure.
And then we have to test for bacteria, right? We test for salmonella and fecal, because those are the hard critters to kill. So we know if we can kill those in our composting process, the other bad critters should be gone too. Because we don't want anyone to get sick. If you're immune compromised, you've got children, you're working with schools, or just anyone's health in general, we don't want to be responsible for a recall of cantaloupes or spinach or whatever it may be. And so we look at all those materials to do our due diligence. And so that's what you see on the report, as well as organic material. You look at respiration of biology to make sure those critters are there. You look for sieve sizes to make sure you're not buying, pieces the size of golf balls. You want smaller pieces. So you're buying not big boulders of wood. You're buying small, broken down organic particles. And so that's what you get on the reports, a nice whole picture, so you know you've got a good product you can be proud of. You know what it's worth, and you know whoever buys your product is going to be happy and safe.
Right.
And that's the key, is to be happy and safe and to do more with less.
And we've used that feedback to change our processes. We've used that feedback to change our mixes and our blends. And some of our blends are pretty complicated. We're trying to grow we do grow a grow bag, and it's a grow soil or a planter's mix or whatever you want to call it. And people don't understand that, technically you can't really grow anything in compost. It's too, what we call, hot, right? It's too much nutrient in it. And so we blend that with usually more organic matter, more wood chips, that kind of thing, clean wood fiber we call it. And if that's composted incorrectly, we have a pretty good basis also when we look at that C to N ratio, that carbon to nitrogen ratio. And so that's a perfect example. One of our blends, which had, I don't know how many products in it, was 20 some odd products, because we wanted the best blend ever on the planet. We wanted to grow 99% of anything you wanted to grow with this mix that we made, and we call that the Ready Go Garden. And you can grow right out of the bag. But when we were making it, we were looking at a lot of different, we got some sawdust, and then we got some wood chips. We were trying to change the particle, size, to have it a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because part of it is you want some large particles in there to help with drainage. But at the same time, the smaller broken down particles is where your microbiology lives, and it's already in a decomposition state. But we put in wood chips when we did the first blend, the wood chips were not pre-composted, which we never even really thought of. And and there was a large quantity of wood chip or clean wood fiber, because we were trying to make it so it wasn't super hot and burn out the seed, right? But when we did it, I think our C to N ratio was off the charts. It was like a 1 to 40. And you said, okay, here's what you got to do. You're going to have to compost that. So it took us, I think we composted it for another 6 months, the whole blend. And, part of it is we don't want gassing off, denitrification. Denitrification, yeah. We didn't want that going on while we were trying to get those wood chips down. Since then, we've changed our process to actually compost the wood chips up front. And one of the ways we accelerated it was to put in a small amount of dairy compost and chicken compost, really small quantity, but it made a huge difference in how fast that reacted, how fast it heated up and composed for us. And then we took it and we blended. So that was a big part of, that learning curve that, you've kind of done this before a few times. It's not your first rodeo, but so this is the test, right, that we're getting. That's your basic, I think you call it your soil profile or your compost profile. Which one is that?
We call it the STA Compost Council, because that's the requirements that they have. But it's good practices, because if you're going to get certification somewhere, well, one, the grower wants to know what are they purchasing. And you need to have the heavy metals for certification, and you have to have the pathogens for certification. And so that way you have everything covered. But we call it the STA Compost Council test, because that's what you have to have, and it's just easier for logging in purposes for people.
We also looked at biology, and you told me, oh, that's going to cost you a lot of money, the one test we did, because with biology, you got microorganisms, and they're a dynamic thing, right? They're constantly, the population's constantly increasing and decreasing, and they're eating each other, and people didn't, but we had and I can't remember what it was that the analysis you did, but you did an analysis that I think you're using gene profiling or something.
We did microbial profile. We'll tell you 6 functional groups, so to speak. They're nitrogen fixers, because the biology that take nitrogen from the atmosphere, sequester it, bring it back into the soil,
Right.
keep your fertilizer input costs down. Cenomyces, we look at aerobic, anaerobic, yeast and molds. I know there's one group in there I'm bringing at the top of my head. My apologies on that. But we tell you the concentration of the of the group. We don't tell you individual critters because I don't have the technology at our facility that we send that out. But remember, it's a snapshot in time because someone's
Right.
cannibalizing someone else. Someone is, growing and dying. And so it's a snapshot of that moment. So you have an idea of what's happening
Right.
today. But it takes
was-
time to grow it out and plate
It's
it.
kind
and
of
all that.
interesting. And one of the things is we only put a small coating of this material down, and it's effective still. So we're not burying the ground with 6 inches of compost. When we spread it, it's less than a half inch, right? It goes in, which always blows my mind, like, because when we talk about soil and soil health, it has to do with the soil structure, particle size, whatever you want to call it. It has, because that soil structure is going to allow for water absorption, but also water drainage. The soil structure can certainly help, and composting helps with cation exchange. It helps with filtration. There's so many things it does, and it's just a small amount that we put in. And that's part of the thing is sometimes I look and I'm like, wow, we got a lot of salts, and the farmers are always worried about salts. And then you'll tell me, like, look, you're putting in, a tiny bit of this stuff on top of, what is really 6 inches of soil. That's the top layer that has all the biology in it, right? And
About.
give or take. I mean, roots can grow down 2, 3, 4 feet or whatever, but for the-
Majority would be like 6 to 8 inches.
right. And so comparatively, the amount of stuff we're putting in is negligible, and then they will either flood it or drip irrigation. And so the water. So if that water's got a lot of salinity in it, or if the existing soil does, what we're doing is almost an afterthought, right? So, yeah, we definitely want to stay within good parameters, and I think we've always pretty much done that. But at the end of the day, in a comparative analysis, there's so little of that compared to the other components that you're like, it's not going to really make that big a difference. So, so soil structure, that's a big thing, and that's the real advantage of compost. If at the end of the day, that and biology, because I try to compare it with fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, oil produced products, which feed the plant with like nitrogen directly through urea or potash feeding, potassium or whatever it is. And a lot of times farmers don't get a complex blend. They don't get the micronutrients or the secondary macronutrients. So they're literally growing with just a handful of the big nutrients. And it works. They grow a product, but that product's not really doing much for the soil or the soil health, right? And that's, the kind of the question that I always pose.
I mean, the compost is going to give you some of the microbes and the biology. It's going to give you some of those nutrients. It does have a lot of those physical properties that you mentioned, right? Helps in moisture retention, opens up the soil so that you get good oxygen exchange so you don't get root rot. It's a good carbon source for the feed the biology, right? If you get the biology to work for you, you don't work for the biology. That way the biology can break down the nutrients, cycle it, bring it from, several feet away to the roots, keep that rhizosphere going. So it does have a lot of benefit. It's about having a good product, and what you learn from your processes, you can't get it from one source. You have to have multiple sources to make that perfect mix, because not all sources are created equal.
Sure. Now I'm gonna maybe pat myself on the back a tiny bit or try to blow up what we're doing, but you have obviously lots of clients and a variety of different clients. Some of them are literally just farmers trying to figure out how to grow a better potato or cotton plant, or you have landscapers out there and they have, grass that doesn't seem to grow, and they got big dead spots in the grass. From a composting scenario, and Hasiel, you tell me, but I think there was only one other U.S. certified composter in Arizona, down in Tucson.
Oh yeah,
or
in
something,
Tucson,
right?
Tinsley. I think that's what Tinsley.
Right, something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that, something. But what do you see from a standpoint of? I mean, you are the certified compost. How many other competitors are out there doing, or how much do you get? Maybe you get some small backyard garden composters or homeowner. What do you
We
normally
get a
see?
little bit from everyone. We've got people who are growing their own compost in their backyard. We have people who are starting up their new facility, landscape companies. Oh, actually, say not nurseries who are trying to make their own blends on site.
Right.
You've got people who are buying products from neighbors and friends and trying to make a co-op. You get a little bit of everyone. But I say we do get a lot from out of state of compost materials because
Because there's not every state has U.S. certified.
right, or maybe
compost.
they're not happy with that facility, or maybe that facility is backed up, and so they want to get another opinion.
Right.
So people
Or they're not getting
shop
the
around.
feedback.
Maybe they're not
like
getting the
you did,
feedback.
right.
That's possible. I mean, when you call us, we answer the phone. We don't say, "Hey, email me or text me." No, you're going to call. We're going to spend the time and talk to you. So a lot of people don't do that anymore.
So the name IAS Labs stands for,
International Agricultural Services.
right?
Which
And
is a
I know
mouthful.
you have done analysis for me from Malawi, which is actually went a lot smoother than I expected. But doing anything with Africa or Malawi is really difficult, getting in and out of customs. But you had the forms, and we literally sent back some water and some soil, and we sent our compost analysis back to you. And much to my surprise, the compost that we had was almost a perfect fit with the soil they had. Because I think in general their soil's a little better maybe than what we have here.
They had naked soil. I call it naked
Right.
soil, very skeletal. The soil need a little bit of everything to get things going.
Right.
And so, and on average, people have to put down anywhere from 2 to 5 tons of compost per acre. Growers do, but I think in your situation, he need a little bit more than that because the soil was very depleted.
The reason it's depleted is they grow so much corn.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny when I went over there last time. I asked them, why do you just grow corn? Why do you grow so much corn? And one thing is it's cheap and easy. The other thing is it's rain-fed agriculture. So they literally right before the rains, they take corn seed and throw it everywhere, including on property that's not even their own. And a lot of times they don't even grade it. They're just growing it, which is okay. But the problem is they'll do it year in and year out. And after a while, there's nothing left. And I think that's a big thing in Africa. And interesting enough, when I asked, well, why do you do so much corn? They said, well, this is Africa. I was like, yeah, what?
Yeah, that makes
And then I was like, well, you do realize that corn comes from Mexico. It doesn't come from Africa. It's only been here for 150 years. And that kind of shocks them because they think that's like the native plant of Africa. One of the things we're doing right now is we're doing what the Native Americans in here have done, and they do a little of it in Africa with the FAO or some of the other USAID, is they're bringing in more legume plants. So because everything is manual over there, right? They don't have big industrial machines. They can't afford the fertilizers. They don't have irrigation. Which ends up actually working out pretty good. So what we've been doing this season, we just planted. The rains were 70 days late, but which is another whole thing with the global climate change. In Ethiopia, I was there in the summer, and they were getting all the rain like 2 months early. And they're like, what do we do? And I was like, it's anybody's guess. But, and what ends up happening is you just, we'll see a soundbite on the news saying there's people starving, and we don't think, well, what does that actually mean? But it means that this is the way they feed themselves and they can't grow anything, right? So that's kind of an interesting setup. We're doing what's called the Three Sisters. I don't know if you've heard of that, right? So we're doing on several different plots out there. We're growing beans, which are a legume, and they will climb the corn. And then we're doing some cover crop like a
Squash.
leafy, yeah, like pumpkin, because they'll eat the leaves off of that or whatever. But what it's doing is it's keeping that soil kind of moist and protected. In the heavy rains, it actually kind of filters that rain so that it's not like eroding the soil they're working in. And hopefully it works for them just like it did Native Americans over the last couple thousand years, you know. And that's one of the concepts. But yeah, with your lab, you were able to tell us how great a mix it is, and it's way easier than mixing in Arizona. I mean, we have a pretty sandy soil here. We have a lot of, it's called caliche, but it's really a lot of that limestone. And that limestone, a byproduct of limestone, is arsenic. And first, when I was reading some of your reports and I had you explain heavy metals, and I was thinking to myself, well, there wasn't like a parking lot here. This is, you know, how would heavy metals even get here? What are you even
They're
talking
everywhere.
about? But they're everywhere, but they're, because some of the natural processes, like the breakdown of limestone, will create arsenic, which is a heavy metal, right? So, and lead was a big thing back 50 years ago throughout, you know, that ended up killing a lot of people. So it's an interesting process that I think you're kind of on the cutting edge or the forefront. And I don't know how much of your time you have to, because you have a book on how to read the analytics of the lab report. There's like a paper. Or a,
No, it's all in my
Or she-
brain. No.
no, it isn't. I've seen it.
It's like TMCC, right? From U.S. Compost, or is it?
Oh, that's
No,
that's
you
a
had
testing book.
your own little. How do I interpret and read the analytics of one of your? Did you even remember that you had
I
it?
never wrote a book. People tell me I should, but
It's like it's not a book.
don't
It's
want
like it's more of a white paper, but it's literally when you're reading our analysis. This is what this means. You know, this parts per ton. Or
I know the
whatever.
bond, the page will tell you high, very high, low, and what that is. And I have to explain to people it's a letter. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's good. You can look at ratios.
Right.
But I know I have like a script that's like I kind of go through, and I wrote it down for a couple people when I was training them how to read a soil report. Or maybe they wrote notes on how to read a soil report when I was training them.
You know, it's one of the crazy thing is we had you do a comparative analysis for us, and we took the big composters in Yuma and in Arizona, and we took a sample of their stuff and we compared it with ours, and it was so day and night difference, the quality, and it has to do with, you just said, it has to do with the inputs,
Yep.
right, and the process that they follow, and what's crazy is that farmers, which are mostly sophisticated people when it comes to understanding soil chemistry or biology, they commoditize it. It's like, hey, we can get a ton of this a lot cheaper than a ton of yours, primarily because of trucking or whatever. But we had to show them that analysis. Another analysis we did, and we used one of our biologists, Guy, was the valuation. So we took your analysis, which tells us pounds per ton, and then we went online to see what the cost if we were to go to buy it from a fertilizer company. And even though some of our compost, our raw our basic compost we sell, $20 to $25 a ton, the value of that when we broke it down by all its elements was $431 a ton. But it's crazy because it's not seen as a value. They're still comparing, apples and apples. They don't realize they got apples and oranges going on, So, but anyway, so Hasiel, with what you're doing, right? You've been doing this now for a couple of years. What has been the big kind of learning curve concepts?
I think a big learning curve concepts for the management and soil seeding water is that sometimes we have hotspots when we do soil analysis, and they'll have like high concentrations of fecal or salmonella. So then we have to go back and just tell management that we have to fix the way that we do things, which is that we have to sanitize our equipment after we turn each windrow. So I think that's a big something that we learned when we did soil analysis with Sherry was that we have to sometimes fix the process so that we can meet certain criteria with US Compost or with Omri.
Sure. And the other big product we produce is the worms, the vermicompost. And we've had you analyze that 10 different ways to midnight as well. And then you did worm counts and stuff
Yeah.
on the vermicompost. So what's the difference between basic compost and worm compost? And what's the difference in processes? I don't even know if US Compost has a protocol for vermicompost, do they?
They do have like requirements. For vermicompost, you have to have it between, I think you have to have it between 65 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you have to have moisture levels between 70% to 90%. So they do have a requirement for vermicompost, and it's that you have to have that moisture level.
During the process
Yeah.
of composting.
During the process of composting, for composting, they have you. The requirement is that you have to have thermophilic phase between 130 degrees.
So that's your
Fahrenheit.
basic
Yeah.
composting of various animal
Right,
products
right.
and wood chips, vegetation. But the vermicompost, you really don't have those same. You're not trying to heat it up or
No.
any of that. You're feeding them something that's pre-composted, right?
Yeah, the only requirement that I've seen so far from U.S. Compost Council and Omri is that they ask us if that vermicompost has been between a moisture level of 70 to 90%
During the process.
during the process. Yes.
Yeah, because when we bag, we can't have it that wet.
No, you have to. You actually have to have it at 12%. That's what U.S. Compost requires. When you send it out, it has to
Right.
be dry.
So we got this whole drying process
Yeah.
that's also
Yeah.
part of the process. How much of that do you analyze? How many people do vermicompost? I know you gave me the name
5
of
or
a
6
guy
people.
up north.
This not as popular as cow and chicken because we have dairies and chickens here. We get usually like a pig, maybe a horse if there's some people having horses, but there's maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 at the most vermiculture people.
Right. Doing it at scale anyway, right?
Right, because a lot of times it's going to be a private entity or it's going to be a nursery that might sell it privately.
Right.
But it's not very common for a large operation that I'm aware of
Right.
to have that done.
In our neck of the woods. And it'd be great to see more competition for us because when we do the analysis on it, that vermicompost is really good. It's really an improved product over the compost. And then you've kind of helped us with the analysis of when we put it to water, right? When we make that compost tea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we haven't really sold much of the liquid compost tea, just from a handling and packaging standpoint, but we make a lot of it and we put it into our blends. So we have a lot of it. And that was one of the recommendations you had for me is make that stuff right at the last minute and put it into your blend and you'll jack that nitrogen up.
Right, because
Remember
most
that.
nitrates are going to be very soluble. And
Right.
so if you've got a wider carbon nitrogen ratio, or if you larger pieces, because some people want that, not everyone, but a lot of people like to have it compost in their gardens or
Yeah, you
in
want
their
it
farms.
breaking down.
You got to have that nitrate so there's enough available nitrogen for both the biology and the plants. If not, the biology will eat it all and leave the plants hungry, and we don't want that.
Right.
And so you're one of the
And that's a
smart
big
people.
problem if you have a lot of organic material that hasn't broken down.
Yes,
Right.
that's the big problem.
And that's one of the things with some of our competitors with the compost. I looked at it and I told the client, it's like, you don't have to buy my stuff, but let me recommend that you don't buy that. I wouldn't pay money and put it on your field because you're putting something that is going to compete with the nutrient on the field, the nitrogen especially, because this thing is maybe in a year or two, after it's broken down, it's a different story. But yeah, the vermicompost is an interesting blend of product base, and what's kind of interesting also is how many people want that. They understand that's like a little more powerful, especially if you're a home gardener.
Yeah, and it's more
why
popular
would you
with homeowners.
why would you put regular compost down if you have a small plot, why not just put the good stuff down? And a lot of our compost still has the cocoons in it. So we've sold our product, especially when it hasn't sat for very long, and we produced it and it's out the door, and we go back to a garden and they're like, "Wow, my garden is full of worms."
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it had to do with the castings. And what's interesting is that worm farming really is like raising cattle, right? And you were kind of put in charge of doing worm population studies. So let's see if you remember, why did we do worm population studies?
We wanted to see when we could separate the pile, like when it was a good time, because since we do continuous worm flow at soil, seed, and water, we wanted to see when it was a good time to start separating that pile and starting a new one. I think
Right.
that's why, yeah.
But the interesting thing is we started with 2 rows.
Right.
And when we first put that stuff down, we couldn't really even see worms. And I was thinking, oh my God, I just bought $75,000 worth of muck, right? And I wasn't sure if any of this stuff, what they were telling me, was reality. And we fed and fed and fed, and then the population started to increase. And so part of that population study is really understanding when the worms have hit their threshold.
Right.
Because based on square footage, you can only have so much worm in a certain space, right?
Right.
So that's the perfect time to strip those worms away and expand. And now we have 6 rows.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, over the last year, we could have doubled that. We just need to get the space for it.
Right.
And we're doing that in a commodity building in California, and most of the world they're doing it outdoors. But where we are, it's so hot. We haven't had an issue, but because we're indoors, we've kept the sunlight off. And this year is the year that we'll start experimenting with trying to do it outdoors in Arizona. Or we have other commodity buildings on the property that we will expand that. But that's the entire kind of the dialogue when it comes to the worm compost versus the regular compost. Another interesting thing is when we were doing it, we didn't know what to feed. Especially when we first started, they said, "Oh, just feed it your compost," and I was like, "Compost," And it took a while to perceive the increase in worm population, but then it's now at a point where you put your hand in and you got just worms everywhere. But we started feeding. I don't know if you remember. We were doing donations to a lot of shelters and a lot of schools during COVID. We did like 1 million pounds of food that we handed out, but we would end up with boxes of tomato or rotten vegetables, and we put them in. And your first advice was chop them up, cut them up so that the worms can eat them. But they gobbled them up like, we'd put in a whole tomato, and you go back in a week, you can't find that tomato. And then the other one was interesting, was the spent mushroom substrate. So my friend up in Utah, in Ogden, gave us a truckload of the substrate he was growing in, which was extremely high in humic and fulvic acid, but it was the same setup. You're like, oh, well, watch out, you're going to kill all your worms. Fortunately, it degraded slow enough for the worms, so were pretty hardy, and we didn't have to, because that was part of the concept was, well, if you're putting in, I guess if we were to feed it nothing but those mushrooms, yeah, I think if I remember right, your advice was to put it in like salty water. What
No,
was
I
the,
wouldn't say salt, because that'll kill it.
right? So what was the?
I don't remember, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So we were. The whole idea is like it's going to be too hot. You gotta break this thing down. And
I'm always about doing little tests, like take a couple worms, feed it. If they do great, then do it to the other worms, so you don't kill everyone. It's better to kill 1 or 2 on a trial than the entire population.
right. And I think we just put it everywhere.
Yeah.
And because we had a lot of rows and a lot of worms, but lucky for us, all they did was love it. They gobbled it up. It seems like whatever we give them, including molasses that we have on the farm, they love that. That's sugar that they go after. So there's a lot of different foods that they can eat. But that's the whole idea is that they're a great composter, and they're a natural being, right? And they're like the primary animal in the food web. You know, if you really think about it, right? They're responsible for denutation or the movement of dirt. It's a natural tillage that goes on, and so it's just not typical to have lots and lots of worms in the Southwest, especially with typical farming practices where you're not keeping the soil moist enough. You don't have enough cover crops, and because of it, you know, the soil dries out and then kills all the worms, and even the bacteria and the fungus are killed. So, but okay, so what big goals do you have for IAS Labs? At some point, there's retirement in the future. Who takes it over? You've got
Retirement. I'm married to McLean. There's no such thing as retirement.
You got a lot of people there, and you've got a lot of expensive equipment.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
I've
you know
walked through
what?
a little bit.
We are thankful that when we get big projects, we use the money and we invest in the lab. We don't pocket it. So all that equipment is owned by the lab, not by the bank. So that's the beauty of the laboratory.
Right.
We're
You
not
can
your
do more
typical-
sophisticated.
We're not the typical
analysis.
business where we own 10% and 90% is owned by the bank. We own ourselves. And so we're actually getting a second ICP MS, and we are now certified to do wastewater 200.8 method. And then
That's a big one.
Yep. And we also expanded a little bit more on the building. We moved our offices more to the new front of the laboratory. And so we've opened up a few new rooms. We got a new IC machine, so we're able to do more stuff with drinking waters for people to make sure they're healthy, like fluoride and other components like that. And then I want to venture into other things like oil and grease, because we make sure that, you know, you're not putting a lot of petroleum in your soils or things of that nature.
Sure.
We thought about PFAS and all that, but that one's a bit more of a challenge, and instrumentation is a little bit more tricky, and so we might hold off a year or two before we jump.
There's so many variables.
Yeah.
That's
But
the biggest issue.
If
Right?
we do a lot of drinking water, we do the typical stuff for soil, right? The soil and plant nutrients, fertilizer registration, compost. We do a lot of humic fulvic acid testing, pharmaceuticals. We do a lot already. We've expanded a lot already. We were fortunate to have a great team that we have already. There's like 12 of us. We're doing water testing for construction sites before the houses and businesses go up, so everyone's safe. But I'm not sure the next exact point. We're looking at more environmental safety avenue, so we'll see.
Right. Well, there's an absolute need for it.
Right.
That's for sure. And there's a vacancy in who's qualified to do
Right.
the work, right? So you're when you're doing analysis, you do it all over the country, is what you're saying. But in Arizona, what is our typical soil profile?
There's
Kind of a sandy loam.
most of it's sandy loam. That's just Arizona. We're salty soil, but we have sandy loam soil, so we're able to control salts. When I say salts, I'm talking about sodium in this situation. That's the main salt of concern. Because remember, we're the salt river. It's called the salt river for a reason. So we're salty soil, salty water, and we have to watch our inputs because we don't want to put something that's really salty and then say grow. That's very, very challenging. We don't want the worms, if we have those in our gardens and in the farms, to die. We don't want to kill the soil biology by killing everything. Everyone's trying to do more with less, right? So everyone's looking at the biology, testing the biology and algae and all that that's present in their soil. They purchase more, make sure it's compatible for Arizona, not somewhere else. That's a big thing. And so we're just trying to help growers in general to get the things.
I'm going to ask some questions that I've already asked you in the past, but I think they are. I'm very curious. Like, so what's it meant when you talk about maturity? Maturity of a compost.
Okay, maturity. So the maturity, there's like several different tests called maturity,
Yeah.
And so that's where I make sure. So if materials mature, the key factors that people are going to look at is there fecal and salmonella? Because if you have a lot of raw materials, if you're talking about mulch, it's usually plant-based. If you talk about compost, it's usually animal-based. So we have to
Right,
make
right.
sure we understand our definitions of these words.
And that's changed over the last 100 some years.
Even the word organic
Right.
is changed dramatically.
And the concept of humus, Right. What is humus?
And that's a tricky monkey, because when you look at the four steps of decomposition, the smallest one is your humates, your humic acid. So if humic acid is supposed to be the smallest form that can no longer be broken down by biology, you can't supposedly use that as a carbon source. But so it's got more physical factors, right? You got for moisture retention, opening up the soil, hormone regulation in plants, iron uptake, and all these other things. But it has fulvic acid, so it's got all these other benefits. I get off on tangents, and I can't remember what I was saying before, so my apologies.
We're talking about the various different concepts, and there's so.
Oh, yeah.
I remember, it's.
Organic, that's what it was.
Right.
So if you go to school and you talk about organic, what's organic, the textbook's going to say material that's carbon-based. That's your definition of organic.
Right.
But then if you go to Omni or some other structure body, and
Some minerals are certified
That's
organic,
organic.
and they're not they're not
right,
they have
it's
no-
not carbon-based. It's
Right.
not plant-animal based.
Right,
It's
right.
the source you took it from and the source you're finalized did not change. So I can take a rock.
wasn't manipulated.
Right, I can take gypsum, which is a big boulder, and crush it into fine clay-like sized particles, and the chemical composition thing has not changed. It's still the mineral form. Its physical state hasn't changed. It's just smaller. So that's considered organic. So you have to figure out what's your definition of organic now, because now you can go and get mine tailings, which are now organic. You can go and buy water from the Puget Sound as an organic fertilizer, because that's technically organic. You can buy compost, and you can buy manure.
So it's a bit of a misleading
And
word.
that's organic.
Confusing
so
word.
you have to decide what is your definition of organic, and then you have to go find those products.
Right.
And then you have to look at that company. Are they using organic practices like you're doing the certifications,
Mm-hmm.
or are their processes not supporting your organic environmental safe practices?
Right.
Are they burning something in ash and then taking that ash to make an organic fertilizer? Do you want to support that? So you have to look at different
I'm always,
things.
when people start talking organic to me and they start talking about food, oh, I bought this is, and I had a partner once years ago, and we shared a ski house, and his wife bought everything organic. But I was like, okay, it's an organic Twinkie. How good is this for you? You know what I mean? It's like, well, what's the point of organics there? And people are like, oh, because it's organic, it's going to be good for me, which is not true.
No, because there's natural carcinogens out there that are organic. Heavy metals are in organic products. So you have to figure out, is this my definition of organic, and does the company represent my same beliefs of how organic sustainability should be? And that's what you have to shop for.
Yeah. One of the things we have to create these different blends, and they're a challenge, right? And we're working with a couple of biologists, and then I always run stuff by you, and I take everybody's concepts here. But one of the blends that we just had Tyler on a podcast from Francis Rose's, and that was a really tricky blend from a standpoint of strategically doing the blending too, because it's like baking a cake. If you put in the frosting first in your bowl, you're not going to have the same cake as if you put it on top, right? So there's a sequencing involved. What we found was that particular blend, because Tyler stipulated a lot of different things. One of the things was mycorrhizae, so we can talk about that for a second. But then also micronutrients. We wanted micronutrients. And micronutrients seem to be kind of valueless to me from a standpoint of marketing or selling, because, no, the reason I say it is because when we compare our compost with other composts, or we compare it with synthetic fertilizer like a urea or a potash, which is a single element, right? Our compost, besides having physical properties, besides having biology, it's got a full plethora of like 14 different nutrients, right? So your macro and your secondary macro, and then all these micros. So we had to blend the micros, and I literally got yelled at or admonished by the biologist, and maybe by you too, saying, you got to be careful. If you put too much selenium in there, you're going to kill everything and everyone, whatever. And so we had, whatever it was, there was a couple of different products that we had to be really careful to not put too much in. However, and boron is one of them, and then molybdenum. I don't know if I ever pronounce these things right. And I know you wrote a whole thesis on molybdenum. I'm like, oh my God, that is like, I'm not sure. I don't know how I can, you know, talk to you about something like that. What's the average person doesn't know what it is, first of all, and you spent like half your life talking about it, and you always talk millennium, and we have pretty good millennium count, not too much, but it's pretty good, which is great to have in there. But so let's talk about some of those micronutrients and the importance, because I had a farmer once who was grew on 10,000 acres, and he put in like the slightest amount of boron, and he said it made a dramatic change. It was what he was missing, and when I mean a small amount, it was like, you know,
Pound per acre.
yeah, pound per acre, and you're doing 10,000 acres is, not a lot of, and it's hard to spread,
That's
right?
why it's called micronutrient. Little tiny
right.
concentrations.
So what's the idea on these micronutrients and on this mycorrhizae? That's a whole different thing, right?
Well, you need them to make the enzymes, right? Yeah, you need nitrogen for, proteins, amino acids. You need phosphorus for DNA. You need potassium for that whole proton pump. But even with people, we need zinc, right? We need for enzyme formation. We need boron to uptake calcium, magnesium, and to help make that cell wall, help fight off diseases. We need molybdenum to make the enzyme so that the plant can use nitrogen. We need to have iron and manganese for photosynthesis. We have a lot of these tiny components that people forget about that is needed to make these plants grow.
So
and
how does
thrive.
it work if a farmer is literally pumping in just 2 or 3 elements into a drip system on a 10,000, 20,000 acre farm, growing plants, and they're only using urea or potash or whatever? They might use only a combination of a couple things. How does it work with are they?
The soil has it in it already. It's still mineral soil. It's present, and the plant will eventually take it out and mine it out over time.
Right.
And then, depending on their water source, some may be there, but in small concentration. But if they're using chemical fertilizers, usually what's on the label is what's present. There's not going to be any extras. But if you use any organic whatsoever, those are present, but they may not tell you what's in there or how much the concentration is.
That's kind of crazy too, because you and I had talked and we went in circles also about available nutrients. Mm-hmm. Oh my God!
And the soil holds things hostage.
So I'm
and
looking at all
related.
the statistics. I got a lot of nutrients. Yeah, but these are available and these are not available and that kind of thing. So
Right.
that's a big part of it. Is like what.
Because the soil is going to hold it hostage, right? The biology is going to consume part of it, but a lot of it's going to be pH dependent. It's going to break down, and the soil is going to chelate with it, and the plants may not be able to access it. Or it's going to take time for the plant to be able to use it up and be able to thrive with it. So you can't put too much in and toxify your fields, but you don't want to put too little in where it's a limiting factor and reduces yield.
Yeah, we Dan and I are involved with hemp seed production, and we're in California, and we're working with a couple of professors that are now in their mid 70s. And one of the things that they told me is that, like, they're worried that we are not producing enough soil scientists in the U.S. And I guess if you're just growing things with fertilizers and you're not really thinking about complete blends and stuff, what's your take on that? Do you see lots? I mean, there should be a lot of jobs in it, but what do you see?
It's hard because now you got the Google in your back pocket, so people
Everybody's an expert,
right? And everyone's got that app. But if those apps aren't always that great, I've never used them. I don't promote or dispromote it, but I've had students tell me they bought an app and they show it to me and I did it work for you? And she said no. So I mean, I'm sure there's some out there that work great, but you got technology that can use infrared and I think to tell them what's in their soil, what's not in their soil and their plants. You've got a lot of fertilizer salesmen who will sell what they're told. This is our program. That's all you need. It's worked for years. It's going to keep working for years.
right?
Or you've got these people who've been in the industry for so long, they self-proclaim as soil scientists. And you do learn it on the job. You can learn more in one day on the farm, hands-on, digging in the soil with a farmer than you probably can in a classroom. So it's very valuable information.
Would
So-
you classify yourself? Let's say there's this seems like this ongoing battle. It's not really a battle, but we know there's been benefits of having synthetic fertilizers. It's helped feed 2.2 billion people.
I use
Take them
both.
on-
I won't
Right.
lie. I use organics. My beds are all organic, and I try to min organically. But I personally have not found the perfect combo of organic products to feed my plants 100%.
Right, right.
So I have to occasionally have
hybrid
to supplement.
program. Sure.
Right. I haven't been able to do that, and the material I have, I know is organic material, breaks down faster than my plants can utilize it because it's all organic beds. It's not mineral soil.
Mm-hmm.
That I have to keep an eye on the pH and use pH as a tool to increase and decrease nutrient availability so I don't get toxicities.
Right.
And so using organics can be a tricky monkey. You can do it. You can be very successful at it. I think on average it's like a 3 to 5 year.
Yeah, I think it's a
learning curve.
regimen, don't
It's
you?
a learning
That
curve.
it takes
Right.
an investment and a faith.
And what works on my farm may not work in your agro ecosystem because you've
True.
got different water, different soil, maybe different crops.
So a lot of it has to do with land management and water
Absolutely, your best management
crop
practices.
rotation. and
Absolutely.
Species.
Crop
and-
residues.
Yeah.
Not tilling up the ground, leaving
Yeah,
the
well, that's
residues
a whole
behind.
different thing. That's a can
And
of
that
worms.
changes the dynamics in the whole.
Right. That was one of the things I was going to say, but I'll save it for the next time. But crop residues are always an interesting thing to me.
Absolutely.
How much do you leave in? How much do you not leave in? Is there a way to get that to? Because if you're growing one crop right after another and you leave too much crop residue in there, it's battling for those nutrients.
Because
right?
yeah, well, they're not. The residues aren't feeding off of it because the residues are died. They're going to decompose, or they're the detritus, the big pieces of organic material before they're broken down.
But you're adding a lot of organic to
Right.
the soil.
But those big pieces are creating shade. And like you mentioned before, it's reducing
And drainage
erosion.
maybe, right?
Right. The rain hits that instead of, detaching soil particles when it hits the soil. So it's
Mm-hmm.
slowing down that. It's keeping the ground a little bit cooler, which is good for Arizona. It's reducing evaporation.
And there's good crop residue and not as good crop residue based on root.
It depends on what you're
depth
trying to
and that kind of
achieve,
thing, right?
So if you've got a nematode problem, maybe that crop residue isn't good. Or if you got a disease or pathogen, maybe you've got to till it in to destroy it so that that disease is not prevalent for the next growing season.
Right.
So it just very depends upon what you're doing and actually your neighbors. Because if they have an alfalfa field and they just harvested, well, the pests that naturally live in there are going to scatter, and then they're going to go into your fields. So it's the whole agro ecosystem. Everyone's is
Sure.
different.
So it's not, I'm going to say, it's not something you should try at home, but we want people to try it at home.
You can absolutely try it at
It's
home.
just there's a lot of,
You might have that
lot of
$300
variables.
tomato or that 50-cent tomato, but it's also, it keeps your brain active. It's a
Sure.
learning process. What works good for you? Do I
something you
need
can do your
shade?
entire life.
Right, and they say it helps release endorphins. It helps calming, gives you a hobby. So why not try it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you can feed yourself, food tastes better when you pick it when it's ripe. And so if you can keep
It's
it.
got most of its nutrient value in
Right.
the first 24 hours too. So
And I do organically because when my kid was little, she'd go in the garden behind the lab and she would eat out of the garden, and I knew she'd be okay. And she
Right.
has healthy snacks, and away she went.
yeah, great.
So go
Well,
for it.
I'm sure I'll have you back on when I can formulate even better questions even, because I have a million questions every time I look at any of the analysis or I'm looking at farming in general. How do we create a better soil for the clients that we have? And that's kind of our goal, and you're a big part of that. So I'm going to wrap up. I appreciate my guests today, Shirley McLean and Hasiel Baez. And thank you for coming. Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Like, share, and subscribe for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for additional resources and visit our guest webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey. Until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.